So, you probably got one of those games. And this is what happened. So let's try to work on it. With the rise in popularity of Soulslikes, through new games like Lies of P, Elden Ring, and Armored Core, comes more questions on how do you actually play those games. So today we will be diving into challenging and immersive world of Souls-like games with minimal spoilers. Genre is pretty similar to Metroidvanias, in which you are incentivized to track back, get shortcuts, and find secret areas. On top of that, having interconnected world, getting access to more tools with each zone or boss that often drastically changes gameplay also plays a huge role. You will usually find yourself in dark fantasy setting, Lovecraftian nightmares, or semi-sci-fi environments. Generally, those kinds of games are on the harder side, and you might want to pay a bit more attention to things happening around you and emphasize tactical approach, rather than pure aggression and onslaught, with few exceptions of course. Bosses, which are really intricately crafted and usually pose quite a bit of danger, especially on phased playthroughs when you still don't know their moveset, quite often having multiple phases to them, which changes the whole fight. Frequent use of iFrames and dodging in general, which I will explain in a different chapter. Bonfires, graces, whatever you call them, they're basically save states with benefits. Currency known as souls, runes, haze, blood echoes, amrita, which can be used to buy new things from merchants or to level up. Twist is, it can be lost upon death and you will have to get back to where you died and pick them up from the floor to retrieve them, and if you fail, you will lose them forever. Building upon souls themselves are boss souls, which are used as currency for turning them in for boss weapons and spells, which are very unique. Alternatively, you can consume them to gain souls themselves, but usually it's not recommended until you made sure that you don't want them. Mimics. A mysterious creature that knows karate, looks like chest, has sharp teeth, and drops interesting things. Importance of stamina usage in combat and refreshing HP and FP, also known as mana, items by sitting by the bonfire. Some games don't have those and use consumables instead, such as Demon's Souls and Bloodborne. Storytelling being mostly done through environment and item description and NPC dialogue, with certain exceptions such as Lies of P, Nioh, Code Vein being more cutscene heavy. Knowing lore about certain bosses and environments enriches the experience tenfold for a huge amount of people and makes you want more. Things can get really crazy when you get deep into it and you see videos such as this one. I would also recommend VaatiVidya's videos on the lore, as it's insanely interesting and super immersive way to get addicted. Being heavy on RPG elements such as stats, which in most cases even locks you out of options until you meet the requirements to wield spell or the weapon. Very little hand-holding when it comes to progression and a minimal amount of tutorials. Shared online world, with visible bloodstains that allow you to check how people died, and seeing other people play in form of ghosts, and infamous message system, which allows you to leave messages with preset words for others and to see them and write them. There's also PvP mode with invasions, and of course there's a lot of community interactions. Interconnected world with incentivized exploration with items scattered all over the world where you can see where you were before and unlock shortcuts, making tracking progress easier and more forgiving, and being able to mostly go through all the zones without loading screens. With the exception of Nioh, where there is no open world fearing, but you have missions and crafted zones instead. Boss music usually fitting the bosses and being absolute spectacle, often giving hints about bosses' emotions and their story, especially in Bloodborne. Usually starting class doesn't matter as much as in other games, as you can easily branch out to different paths throughout the game, but you can basically start with whatever you want. For a lot of people, starting with shield helps a lot in learning the game. For others, it's magic, which allows attacking from a distance, so it's very preferential after all. In Demon Souls, though, I'd recommend starting with Royalty class, which is magic build, and helps with Fair Zone a lot. For all others, just go with whatever you feel will be fun. Starting Gifts is a system that allows you to choose an item or spell that you will be starting with on top of your selected class, so it's pretty nice to pick it. Often it's a talisman or a ring that increases your HP, and in Dark Souls 1, for example, it can even be a shortcut unlocking key, which is called a Master Key, which can speed up your progress quite a lot if you know what you're doing. But I wouldn't stress too much about it when you're starting out, but usually when you see something that increases HP or something like that, it's pretty safe pick. Most important concept you want to learn is the existence of mechanic known as iFrames, which stands for invincibility frames. In huge simplification, it means that certain actions such as rolling have certain amount of frames where character is not affected by anything thrown at them. Frames in this case are referring to frame rate, so in the game being rendered in 30 FPS, for example, with fast roll you get 13 frames in which you can't be attacked in and can't perform any other action. In reality, you will never look at it in a technical way, but you will experience it, and through that experience you will get a feeling to when to roll and when to avoid things and what will be your invincibility time. There's also a concept known as recovery frames related to iframes, which basically describes the amount of time after the end of action that you won't be able to perform any other action. Soulslikes share similar formulas for stats and have the soft and hard cap on skills, which determines how big diminishing returns will be. For example, in Elden Ring, 1 point of vigor till 40 gives you between +4 to +48. It basically raises exponentially every level, and 41 to 60 gives you from 26 to +13. So it already decreases quite a lot, but from 61 to 99 it goes all the way to +6 until +3. So it's easy to see that the soft cap for stats like vigor would be around 40 and hard cap 60. You don't really want to go above that, as you get quite a big of diminishing returns instead. So a lot of people just go for another stats after that instead, or they're spread evenly. Most common breakpoints hover around 20, 30, 45, 50, 60 and 80, depending on the game. So sometimes you want to check what are the soft caps for certain stats in games you will play. Vitality increases your base HP and also increases resistances to certain enemies depending on the game. Endurance increases base stamina while also providing boosts to equipment load and resistances to elements. Capacity increases equipment load and is not tied to vigor like in other games. In Code Vein it also increases elemental resistance. Mind increases FP, so think something like mana. In Code Vein affects stamina, drain speed and light gifts. Attunement increases the amount of spells you can have on the hotbar. Intelligence increases magic or status damage done. Spread to Arcane, Faith and Int exists to separate stat that is required for certain schools of magic, like Holy for Faith. You can generally tell which one you want to level by checking what stat is the highest in the requirement on the spare or checking description. Faith increases item discovery, so basically chance to drop rare items from enemies, and increases magic defense on top of scaling with Faith, scaling weapons and spells like Miracles. Strength increases damage done with strength scaling weapons and general physical damage down and allows to wield heavy weapons. In Code Vein also increases HP. In the Nioh also improves key pulls. In Fromsoft games, you can cut strength requirement with two-handing weapon. This increases your strength by half, which also is a pretty nice mechanic to take advantage of. Dexterity increases physical damage done, increases damage done with weapon scaling with that stat. In Nioh, additionally increases the amount of ninjutsu you can carry and increases ninjutsu damage. Adaptability, stats strictly in Dark Souls 2, increases your agility and poise. It's generally recommended to get it to 25 or 39 to have the same amount of iframes like in other titles, because this is the stat that affects it. Stats specific to certain games: Willpower and Code Vein, which increases resistances to elements like physical damage, fire damage, and also increases dark gifts. Skill in Nioh improves ninjutsu, scales with skill weapons, unlocks samurai points, like pretty much everything else. Magic in the Nioh scales with Onmyo magic, increases carry capacity of Onmyo magic, allows to earn more magic, and reduces stamina debuffs of yokais. Spirit in Nioh boosts Guardian Spirit, adds similar buffs like magic, and also increases Amrita gauge generation. Heart in Nioh increases ki, increases damage with swords and bows, and unlocks samurai points. Stat specific to Sekiro is attack power, which increases vitality and posture damage of attacks. Vitality increases HP bar. Posture increases posture bar, so basically amount of attacks you can block or deflect without getting exhausted. Substats worth mentioning: weight limit. Since every wearable thing has weight attached to it, this stat dictates how much of the weight are you able to carry, and also depending on the threshold changes how nimble you are. In Elden Ring, for example, being under 30% of weight limit gives you light load status and makes your roll animation really fast, keeps 30 iframes and 8 recovery frames, while also increases the distance traveled with a roll and allows for quick backsteps. Range 30 to 69.9, nice, gives you medium load status and have same properties as light load, with the nerf to distance traveled. Being in the range of 70 to 100 gives you heavy load status, which changes your movement drastically. It gives you 12 iframes, but recovery frames are doubled with 16 frames in total, which makes you susceptible to being hit. On top of that, it reduces your stamina regeneration rate by roughly 20%, which is also a pretty big deal in combat. Just looking at the description, you can probably tell that you don't want to be in this range, with very few exceptions of super tanky meme builds, where you don't even have to roll, as well as in the next one. 100% equipment load makes you barely mobile and unable to roll. Avoid it at all cost. Additionally, in the Nioh, equipment ratio affects ki regen rate, reduces ki needed to execute actions, and affects weapon scaling with certain agility range. Poise, basically a stat that reduces your chance of getting crowd control by enemies, so something like stagger, stun, something like that, usually allows for pretty fun meme builds with high armor and poise that allows you to just spam R1 and go through most of the attacks. In Nioh, Lies of P, Dark Souls 3, and Elden Ring, at certain point in the game, like roughly 30%, you get ability to respec your build if you want to, and I wouldn't worry about wrecking up your build early on and having to deal with the consequences unless you restart the game. Amount of times you can respec though is often limited, so I wouldn't go too hard on them. In Code Vein, you can't go wrong with leveling up though, because increasing level itself raises your HP and stamina, and your build is defined by blood codes and blood vials instead. So you can't really go wrong with leveling up all the time. In Dark Souls 1, 2, and Demon Souls, you cannot reset your stats. So I would start leveling stamina and HP till you have some idea what playstyle you want to go for. For Dark Souls 2 and Demon Souls, at the end of the game there is an option to kinda reset your level to level 1 via certain means, but it doesn't give back your currency spent, so you have to get it again to get your build going, so it can be very tedious. I could potentially recommend checking videos like Elden Ring All Weapons Moveset Showcase, or googling the weapon from boss you just killed, unless you want to keep it sweet and exploring and checking how cool and creative some weapons can be by yourself. In general, I'd say that playing dex builds and magic builds in most of the games gives you the easiest learning curve just due to short recovery times from animations and big stamina pool for dodging, which makes a lot of encounters very forgiving. Especially magic builds, as they give you a lot of room to work with in terms of range, but at the same time, due to longer casting time, you might spend more time in one place, making you vulnerable to enemy attacks, so it's always a learning game. Pyromancy is considered easy mode for Dark Souls 1 and 3 though. And then I'd say strength builds in terms of difficulty, due to slower movesets and long recovery frames, making you vulnerable to attacks. This is strictly speaking about fighting bosses, because while you fight regular enemies, you can utilize strength weapons to stagger the enemies out of existence, which makes them pretty much unable to move. Whenever I pick up a new Soulslike, I always go for 20-20 stats for HP and stamina equivalents in the game, as those stats are always needed, well, unless you're running with soul level 1, but we're besides that. And even for magic builds, you need both of them to survive and even cast spells, as when you cast spells, your stamina is also consumed. Usually around that mark, I play around with general weapon types the game offers and can decide on what build to go for, at least for the time being, as in many games you can just respec and try other things out. For the gear itself, in Fromsoft games it's usually called fashion souls for a reason, because usually armor doesn't make enough of a difference to worry about it, so most people just make sure to stay in medium equipment load at least, and look cool. Sometimes you can equip certain armors to get resistance to things like poison, and it can make a difference. Additionally, there is infamous armor called Havel's set, which has crazy amount of poison resistance and can be used in fun tanky builds. In Nioh though, it's pretty much main source of your build's customization. It provides ARPG-like stats that drop randomly, or you can attach them with NPC blacksmith later on. With weapons, just try to find something you think looks fun and complements your stats and playstyle. In Elden, the defining factor for weapon choice is usually Ash of War. For normal weapons you can change Ash of War between them, but for uniques you cannot. So also you need to take that into account. Other factors are mostly moveset, weight, and stat requirements. What I probably wouldn't recommend is googling stuff like best weapon in Dark Souls 2 or how to get OP early in Dark Souls 3, and going step by step with the guide, as it spoils way too much of the game and you won't learn much doing that, and you will hit the roadblock sooner or later anyway, and will have to pick up on the things in a way harder environment. So how do you tell if your spell or weapon scales with certain stuff? It's actually fairly simple to tell what weapon and spell scales with, usually. Look at the stat, attribute scaling, attack abilities windows. For spells, you can usually look at the stat required and visually identify that it's, for example, Faith or Int, or you can show more details and read the description. Miracles are scaling with Faith, sorceries scale with Int, pyromancies in DS1 only don't scale with any stat. The only thing increasing its damage is Pyromancy Glove, which also makes it pretty unique. In Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3, Pyromancy scale with Int and Faith at the same time, making it very appealing for variety of builds. In Nioh, it's similar to Codebane, in which you just look at the weapon stats and check for attack bonus scaling. In general, more strategic combat approach is recommended to tackle the challenges awaiting. So let's examine what you should take into account. Try to get into mindset of constant learning and you will be greatly rewarded for overcoming challenges. Patience is key. Prefer more defensive playstyle with attacking right after enemy attack. Usually they have recovery frames good enough to deal damage to them during that time. This is concept also known as punishable attacks from fighting games. Try to learn enemy patterns and possible openings for your attacks. Usually you will build up muscle memory dealing with the bosses with just seeing the visual or audio cue. Take really good hitboxes into account. They're usually so good that almost pixel perfect avoidance is possible. Enemies usually have really nice telegraphed attacks. Certain movements like raising arms above to indicate striking from above, and you can use them as telling signs that shit is about to go down. In good games you'll be usually able to predict what most humanoid enemies will do, and will just have to get used to the timing, because it's very natural. Keep track of your stamina. Very often stamina can be used interchangeably with health. just due to correct usage of iFrames and being able to just avoid the damage, so try not to spam rolling or anything like that and learn to use them deliberately. If you're playing with a shield, which I can recommend at the start, keep in mind that you still take damage while blocking, and if the attack is strong enough to break your stamina bar, you will also get staggered for a while, which will most likely mean you are getting hit with the follow-up. Hide opportunities to heal. Usually you can run away and hide behind the environment if enemy doesn't have too many ranged attacks or uses moves that put them in place. So you can use healing like Estus as they lock you in place and take a bit of time, and often by trying to heal you can lose more health in exchange and lose 1 charge of consumable. Learn the moveset of the weapon you're wielding so you can more accurately tell when you can punish boss's attack. Press dodge repeatedly while knocked down to get up faster. Holding block reduces stamina regeneration, so try to space yourself in a way that allows you to release block to regen stamina a bit. In games in which you can summon companion or co-op online, try to keep an eye on the aggro of the boss, which basically means that the boss is focused on certain target over the other one because the AI needs to know which one to prioritize, and try to use it to your advantage. I personally wouldn't recommend trying to parry bosses on your first playthroughs, unless it's Bloodborne or Dark Souls 1 last boss, as you can do it pretty safely there, and it's heavily rewarded. Try not to get too mad at the game and take every death as a learning experience and learn from own mistakes. Often you're pretty close to killing the boss and you're not sure how to give yourself like a bit of leverage. So you retried it a couple of times, you feel confident with it. I'd say that this is the time where you can start using your consumables that boost your damage or combat abilities. I wouldn't use them otherwise unless they're replenishable, like in a Nioh for example, where you rest you get new chargers of your ninjutsu. If you're having way too big of a trouble fighting the boss, upgrade your stats and weapons by farming the mobs before the boss arena. It makes things substantially easier, and sometimes you might be even under-leveled for the challenge, so this might help you enough. For group of mobs, if you are struggling, just try to run through. You can, in most cases, just do that and collect stuff and get to the next bonfire. If all of the above fails, Google tips for the bosses, but a lot of fun is hidden behind finding out stuff about the game by yourself, as the world is insanely good for exploring and feels super rewarding. For general explanations of skills and some things, you can press explanation or description button, give you a hint what you're looking at, as it's very easy to get overwhelmed when starting out. Bonfire, Grace. Bonfires are checkpoint systems with benefits. Additionally, by resting at the bonfire, you reset all dead enemies if killed, excluding bosses, and many titles you can also level up using it, restore durability of weapons, and restore Estus flasks. World is semi-persistent, in which enemies besides bosses respawn if you die or rest at the bonfire. Estus flasks. Replenishable consumables that restore your HP or FP, they can be allocated. You can have, for example, 3 healing ones and 2 FP ones, so you can set it to your liking. If you think there are very few of them at the beginning, then don't worry. You'll find the items like golden seeds in Elden Ring or fire kipple soul in DS1, which after giving to NPC, you will be able to increase the number of uses, and also different items that will increase the amount of HP and FP restored by flasks can be obtained, so the progress is always made. You can check multiple flasks with just one startup animation by pressing X or square repeatedly on the gamepad. Souls, or the derivatives, are the currency used for both leveling, upgrading gear, and buying items from merchants. This currency will be dropped on death, and you will have to reacquire it by getting to the point you've died at, and if you were to fail, it will be overwritten by your current soul status, and you won't be able to retrieve the previous one. Maidens in most Souls-like games are used for leveling up and telling you about some story, and also they play a big role in the endings. Hollowification and humanity are only tied to mainline souls. This system is influenced by dying. If you die, your appearance changes and additional restrictions might happen. Ability to summon NPC and other players is removed, HP is reduced, work tendency changes in Demon Souls, and you can revert that state by using mechanics specific to their respective games. In Demon Souls and Dark Souls 2, it further reduces your HP by half. that you can counteract with Ring that cuts the reduction in half. So you end up with 75% HP upon being in that state. Even more than that, dying in Archstone zones changes your world's tendency towards dark, but I will explain this in the Demon Souls specific video. Parrying and backstabbing. With pressing L2 while using shield, some daggers can also parry. You can parry an attack, which allows you to use repulsed attack, which deals massive damage to an enemy, also known as visceral attacks from Bloodborne. Backstabbing also exists, which allows you to sneak up on a regular enemy and attack them for a big opening. Weapon durability plus weapon break. Mostly Lies of P in Fromsoft games. It's a stat on the weapon that determines if weapon is damaged. In general, when it hits 30% threshold, it will mark that weapon as at risk, and it loses 30% of its power and damage reduction when blocking. When it hits 0%, it will become broken, and will lose 50% of its power as well, and often it will also bounce off of enemies, like in Lies of P. There are enemy attacks that decrease weapon durability drastically, but you can counteract it with repair powder, or repairing at the blacksmith, and when it's not 0%, resting at the bonfire. In Lies of P, it's really important to keep track of it, as it renders the weapon close to useless when it breaks. To counteract durability reduction, you are given Grindstone that you can use in combat without problem and get it running again. Lock-on system is there to keep better track of mobile bosses, and you can toggle the lock-on system, which keeps your camera focused on the boss by pressing the right stick button. Very useful when boss is moderate size, so something about like humanoid in a way, but if the boss is really huge, I prefer to play without a lock-on. Distinctive weapon upgrade system. With many non-unique, so basically non-boss weapons, you can change their element and stat they're scaling with while retaining their moveset, which allows for a lot of customization. Generally in Souls, there is two types of upgrade materials, which are Titanite shards, chunks and slabs for regular weapons in Dark Souls, and Titanite scale Twinkling Titanite for unique weapons. In general, boss weapons only upgrade to level 5, while normal weapons go all the way to level 10. In Elden Ring, it's level 25 and 10 respectively. Other titles have different upgrade paths, with Dark Souls 1 being the most convoluted one. Invasions. Both by NPC and online players. In certain areas, if you're offline, you can get invaded by an NPC that you can defeat for rewards. If you're online, you can get invaded by a real player instead, but at all the times. And often they can ruin your day. So if you had enough, you can always change to offline mode and avoid getting invaded by other players. Mimics. You can see if chest is a mimic by looking at the chest and if it's breathing, or if the chain is pointed towards you. Illusory walls or hidden passages. Sometimes in the world you can find walls or altars that are actually illusions and lead with hidden paths to often pretty cool things. Animals, mostly dogs. Likely most annoying type of enemies in game, very evasive and small hitbox, which makes them pretty awful to deal with. Also runs in grips usually, and you can get stun blocked to death without even knowing you took so much damage. Weapon arts. Some weapons, usually unique ones, have special move that you can execute with L2, often consuming FP. Sometimes there's also charge R2 for a special move, but it depends on the weapon. New Game Plus. So basically, New Game Plus I feel like was popularized by a Soulslike genre, and it's a system where when you finish the game, you can start a new cycle while keeping a lot of your stuff, like so you keep like your build, weapons and stuff. Some items disappear though, so better to check what disappears before starting New Game Plus. And usually it caps at around +7 New Game cycle, and every cycle increases the stats of enemies and scaling in general, so it can get pretty one-shotty in the higher ones. Magic. You can unlock a lot of spells, but can only wield limited amount at a time. You can select which ones you want to equip by interacting with Bonfire and selecting attuned spells. The number of attuned spells depends on the stat you have in the game. So for example, in Dark Souls 1, it will be attunement skills that will increase the level of possible spells attuned to your hotbar. You can also two-hand both of your left and right hand weapons if you want to. So basically in Dark Souls 3, for example, by holding triangle or Y, you can hold your left weapon as a two-hand, and in Elden Ring it's done by holding a triangle button and the weapon attack button. Covenants are pretty much Souls version of factions. To join them you need to find correct NPC or a statue and devote yourself to it. And after raising your reputation you can get access to new spells and weapons. Questlines are those elusive things in Soulslikes. Without a guide it's usually very hard to follow them, but if you do, they're super rewarding lore-wise and often give unique rewards, and usually are a blast to go through, although often involve sad stories. The biggest problem with them is probably the fact that they're super missable if you don't know where to look, and many actions in the game can cancel out the whole quest lines, and there is usually no way to get them back. Sometimes mechanic known as absolution helps, but only if that NPC got hostile towards you and you are still at the correct stage of their quest line. I would recommend checking out possible quest lines on before second playthrough and trying to follow them with just looking up where and when to check for NPCs and what action you need to perform to progress their story. If you use any mods, FPS unlocks or something like that, you have to play in offline mode, or else Anti-Cheat will detect discrepancy in your client and block your online functionalities on your account. First with warning, and if you remove that save state you can play again, but if your account standing doesn't improve, you get banned. I heavily recommend playing on a gamepad. The game was designed to play on it and it is way more comfortable, but some mad lads still play through all the games on keyboard and mouse. Go into settings and check button mapping, change if you want to. Back buttons, you can use them for very cool things. I would recommend binding dash and sprint to back buttons especially. It makes moving so much more convenient and you can run around and move camera without issues and weird finger placements. Other buttons worth binding might be jump if the game has it on separate button, or block. The settings I would definitely turn off is motion blur, head bob, camera shake. Also you can adjust camera movement to your liking to make it more snappy. And besides that, I would adjust graphics settings to keep steady FPS, because as we talked before, the FPS is tied to amount of invincibility frames. So basically if you have unstable FPS, you will get unstable iFrames, which means that you will probably get mad quite a lot about them. With the recent releases of Soulslikes, it's easier to get into the genre than ever before. Two games I would definitely advise to start with over the others are Lies of P and Elden Ring. With Lies of P you can get it on Game Pass, so investment is pretty low, and the game provides a lot of tutorials and explanations to systems used in majority of the games. And it has one of the best onboarding systems currently, while also innovating on certain systems. After that, it's definitely Elden Ring. Can't really go wrong with recommending that game. It's just that good and it got so many new players to the genre, and it still is one of the most played games on Steam despite launching almost 2 years ago. It streamlined the experience while changing the linearity to open world design, and it's very refreshing to play, and has best variety of builds from Soulslikes besides Nioh, which might as well be separate genre. If you aren't interested in those, then I would recommend Bloodborne, but it is quite dated and at this point even requires PlayStation 4 and 5 to play, which might be a big roadblock for a lot of people, just like Demon's Souls, which is absolutely amazing as well. Next recommendation will be Dark Souls 1. Even though pretty junky, it has a lot of charm and opens eyes for many things. Dark Souls 3 is very soon to follow, with being the least junky Dark Souls game. If you're looking for something more, then you should look into Nioh, although it is the hardest game to get into, even if you are a veteran of Soulslikes. But especially Nioh 2 provides amazing experience and unparalleled combat options. If you enjoy streamlined story, anime graphics, and a lot of freedom while also being somewhat on the more relaxing side, then Code Vein might be for you. In case you like shooters, then Remnant from the Ashes and Remnant 2 are excellent games to get into. They were met with a lot of skepticism when launching, as mainly shooting in Soulslikes wasn't exactly something people expected to work well, but that proved itself very quickly. If you like sci-fi, then Surge will be for you, and if you are into mecha, then Armored Core 6 will most likely blow your mind. For precise gameplay crafted just to suit mainly one kind of playstyle, you need to check out Sekiro. With its attention to detail and rhythm game approach, it quickly became a fan favorite for a lot of people. It also won Game of the Year, so it speaks for itself. Now, for the elephant in the room, why didn't I mention Dark Souls 2? Well, it's a super divisive game, with people tendencies going towards the extremes, with people either hating it or loving it, with very spare room in between. Personally, I absolutely love it, despite its junkiness, especially when going back to it after playing later titles, but the issues with the game are quite undisputable. They came up likely due to different directors working on the game, and part of the team working at the Bloodborne at the time, and generally being poorly managed. Till Elden Ring, it had the most amount of bosses from all Fromsoft titles, at staggering 41, which was almost double that of Bloodborne, if we are not counting Chalice dungeons. It also has the best New Game Plus system, which also changes enemy placement and some bosses change slightly as well. It also had a system to respawn bosses and raise the zone difficulty level, where you've burned an item at the bonfire, which was amazing. Personally, I would advise playing it after Dark Souls 1, probably as it's a bit weird to get into it after playing way more polished titles. We will look roughly at what I'm thinking when fighting the boss in the next video. Here you can check the playlist of my plays till you unlock the ability to upgrade your weapons and level up in most of the Soulslikes. So I came to the end. So thank you for watching and I hope you enjoyed it and it helped a bit. This video took a long time to make, so it would be lovely if you consider liking and subscribing if it helped you, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.